Hi, welcome to Wisdom and Beyond. I'm Dr. Teena Cahill, and today we have a very interesting and great guest. Hello there, Keith Smith. How are you?
Excellent, Tina. How are you?
I'm great. Keith, you're the author of a book called Men in My Town, which is a story that's mostly factual. Not some of it you've added, embellished a little bit, but this is a story about something that went on in your life and how it ended, and you've decided to put this journey that you've been on into book form and see what you can do to sort of change the world. Would that be right?
It's true.
All right. So you're from Rhode Island.
Yes.
All right, and we're a hockey player as a kid, right? I can guess that. And so that means you're a pretty tough guy, right? You have to be a pretty tough guy to be a hockey player.
I thought so.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
No, I actually think so. And so you and I met at a party. We met at a party for a mutual friend who's also an author, right? And we started talking, and you told me about your book, and you told me about your story, and I asked you if you'd be willing to come on this little chat show that we have and share this story with us. So go ahead. Tell us about Men in My Town.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Tina.
You're welcome.
Men in My Town is a story it's my own story. At the age of 14, I was coming back from a meeting with my hockey team, and I did something that kids did back in the mid-'70s. I was hitchhiking home.
Yes.
I turned out to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
But everybody hitchhiked back then. I mean, when I was in college in the 60s, I hope my children aren't watching, we would hitchhike around Mexico. I mean, my mother would have freaked, but it didn't seem that dangerous back then.
It didn't.
And you were in a small town.
I was in my hometown. It was just 4 or 5 miles from my house.
Sure.
And you know, what's interesting, you said it didn't seem that dangerous. It didn't seem, but it really was.
That's right. It's
And
true.
a guy pulled over. The door opened to his car. I got in the car, closed the door, told him where I wanted to be dropped off. 4 or 5 minutes into the trip, he drove right past the spot where I asked to be dropped off. I told him to pull over at the fire station, maybe 100 yards up on the right. He drove right past that stop, and I realized at that time it wasn't a mistake that he didn't stop at the first place, and that he intentionally had driven past the second spot. He went a little bit further down the road and took a right off the main road, which is called Smithfield Avenue. He took a right onto one of the side streets, and at that time, I realized it was my opportunity to try to get out of the car. I tried to unlock the car to literally roll out of the automobile and into a parking lot, and when I went to open the door, I came to realize the door had been rigged. It was closed, it was locked. I wasn't getting out. The guy that picked me up turns out to be a twice convicted recidivist pedophile predator. So hitchhiking seemed like it was safe, but it really wasn't.
That's true, I agree. We just didn't know, right?
We did not know.
I know, it's true. And so sometimes when we complain about some of this cable news stuff that goes on, it's important that we know these things. And when we're driving, it's really important that we know when we're driving along the interstate and the highway that we get amber alerts. And in Florida, I think they're called silver alerts for elder people that are missing and all that kind of stuff. So what happened then? You tell us the rest of this story.
I realized I was being abducted, and I had no idea why. And at the age of 14, I had no idea of what was coming. I got picked up, it was probably around 6:30 or so. I started to take a look in his car to identify things. I memorized what he was wearing, what the interior of the car looked like. I took his license plate number.
So smart.
This, in Rhode Island, the inspection stickers on automobiles are in the lower right-hand corner on the passenger side of a car. It's different than in New Jersey. So it's on the lower right-hand corner, and I could look at it and see it, and it was written. His license plate number was there, and I just kept saying it to myself. There was no dialogue between me and the guy driving the car, so I just kept memorizing his license plate number. We went through town. We literally drove past the state police barracks. And I remember as we were pulling up toward the state police barracks, I was literally praying that a cop would be returning from duty and maybe pull up behind this guy.
Sure.
So I was looking in the passenger side mirror. If I could see a cop coming up behind us, I'd make a commotion in the car that would absolutely get us pulled over. That didn't happen. I was hoping a cop would be pulling out, going on duty. It didn't happen. He drove past, there's a state park in my hometown. So I grew up in Lincoln, Rhode Island, and Lincoln Woods is this beautiful park. And as he was pulling up toward Lincoln Woods, I was hoping he wouldn't pull in there. And at that moment, I said, if he pulls into Lincoln Woods, he'll kill me. I had no idea I was about to be a victim of a sexual assault.
Right.
Fortunately, he went past Lincoln Woods, so I was relieved. And then he went down a street and pulled off the side of the road literally pulled down a dirt path in the woods, and then proceeded to attack me. There was a moment earlier when I tried to get out of the car and realized the car was rigged, so I
Right.
couldn't get out. He was obviously sitting to my left. He turned to his right and threw a left into the left side of my head, and punched me. And at that point I realized that, again, I didn't know it was a sexual assault that was coming, but I knew the guy was violent.
Right.
And the assault occurred. He literally drove me back. And he didn't know where I lived, right? I was hitchhiking, and he just picked me up. And I told him where I wanted to get off. He had no idea where I lived. So it wasn't like he drove me home and put me in my
Right.
driveway. He stopped his car probably maybe 10 blocks from my parents' house in a parking lot of a deli. And again, my door's locked, so I can't get out. So he got out of the driver's side and walked around the car and unlocked the passenger side. Now, I'm not about to get out because he's outside of the car. As long
Right.
as I'm in and he's out, I feel pretty
Right.
safe. So I didn't get out. He walked to the front of the car, went down to the front, and came over toward the driver's side to get back in. And when he was on the driver's side of the front of the car, I realized it was my opportunity to get out. I leaped out of the car. And Tina, you ever pull up in a parking lot, those cement blocks that you pull up to?
Yeah, usually I hit them.
Somebody
You
hit
can
this
ask
one.
my husband.
Someone's hit this one more than once, because when I got out of the car, the one that was there had been shattered.
Ah.
And as I looked down, it was instinctive. It wasn't something I thought about. I got out of the car, and he was on the other side. I looked down. There was a chunk of cement from one of those parking blocks that was loose. Not very big, maybe the size of a brick or a softball. I picked it up, and I threw it through the back. Well, I threw it against the back window of his car. And I was running as I did it. I don't know if it went through, but I could hear it shatter. I ran through a parking lot, up a hill, down a street, and hid on more than one occasion. All I wanted to do was get home. I was out of the car. I was relatively safe, but I wasn't totally safe because I
Right.
wasn't yet home.
Right, and you're running home now understanding what could happen and thinking your life is in danger.
Yeah. A couple of occasions I hid. Cars came down the
Sure.
streets, and
Yeah.
in my mind, the mind of a 14-year-old boy
Sure.
who just went through this ordeal, the car coming down the street had to be
Right.
him. He was coming back to look for me.
I think that would be in the mind of most anyone that went through this. Yeah.
I hid under an automobile. That
Yeah.
car passed. I got out and made it one block before another car came. I hid under some hedges. That car came and left. I finally made it home. I did make it home. My father and my brother. I have a very large family, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles. The only ones that knew my story were my brother, my oldest brother, who was there when I made it to the house, and my father. I literally went into the house, collapsed. My oldest brother picked me up, carried me out of the house, called for my father. The three of us ended up in the police station 10 or 15 minutes after I got home.
Thank goodness for your oldest brother who recognized immediately something had gone on.
There's no way that he could have known what it was.
No, he couldn't have
but
known.
He
He
just
knew it was-
intuitively, he
yeah.
knew it was something
Right.
horrible,
Right.
and something had terribly gone
Right.
wrong.
That's right. So you went down and you told the police, and they arrested this guy and indicted him. Is that right?
Yeah, a couple of things. I showed up at the police station, and you've got this 14-year-old terrified boy telling this horrific story. And I remember the cop was asking me, kind of forcefully, did you know this guy? Have you ever seen him before? Do you know who he is? My answers were no, no, no. I don't know him. I've never seen him before. I don't know who he is. But I broke the window to his car. I knew his license
That's
plate
right.
number. I scratched the passenger side of the seat. So I was trying to leave marks.
How smart of you.
Thanks. I was able to give the license plate number. Within a few minutes, the police ran the license plate number. The cop walked out of the room. The detective came back in, and the detective pretty much grilled me. And he said, "Are you sure you don't know this guy?" And I said, "Absolutely, never saw him before." He said, "Well, you got the right guy." Because when they ran his license plate number, his prior record came back. So they knew he had been arrested a number of times on sex-related crimes, crimes against children. He had been in prison in Rhode Island. And again, my assault took place on March 1st of 1974. It was a Friday night. He had been released from prison just in November of 73, just 4 months before.
Wow.
So the police knew this wasn't some kid just, claiming that a neighbor or a coach or a teacher or
Right.
clergy did this to him.
Right.
It was a total stranger, never saw the guy
And this
before.
is before people had to register.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So the cops arrested him. A couple of days went by. I participated in a photo lineup, identified him out of a photo lineup. He was indicted. I testified in front of a grand jury in the indictment. He was indicted. A trial date came, but Tina, he never went to trial.
Right, and so before we talk about that, let's say again that your book is called Men in My Town. Tell us about these men in your town?
Yeah, when I first start telling the story, people think the book's about the bad men in the town.
Right.
And that's not it at all.
That's right.
I was very fortunate. There were a group of men in my town, and they were not relatives. They were guys that were older than my brother, younger than my father, and they were elected officials that run the town. And then there are other people who actually run the town. And these men in my town were great men. They were good men with the propensity to do some bad things.
Right.
But they were good men, hardworking men, good guys who were always very good to me. So the book it's not about the assault. It's not about, oh, woe is me, I'm a victim. That's not the story at all. This book...
Nor are you a victim.
Right. This book is really about the relationship of a boy who went through an incredible trauma, and it's his relationship with these men in his town who protected him between the time of the assault and who protected him for the next 18 months.
Right. And what happened 18 months later?
Again, I mentioned that the guy that attacked me was indicted.
Right.
But he never went to trial. I do recall that the trial date was set. We got a phone call one night, maybe even the morning of the trial, a night before or the morning of, and we were told the trial had been postponed. He never went to trial. Someone beat him to death. He was beaten to death in the streets of Providence. His body was left on the sidewalk in Providence. And to this date, no one's ever been charged with the crime. So Teena, somebody, got away with murder.
Right. And what happened for you after that happened? Because here you were, a young child who no one knew about this, but your father and your brother, carrying all of this inside of you in a time when we weren't as free to talk about these things as we are now, right? So after you found out he had been murdered, what happened for you?
It was a combination of immediate relief, right? This, I'll be polite, this guy was no longer around to hurt me. And I knew he had been arrested before, so it wasn't just about me, but he was no longer around Teena to hurt me or any other child, especially kids in my town, my section of town. So I was relieved, overwhelmed. I was crying, literally on my orange 10-speed bicycle in front of a Cumberland Farms store, kind of the Rhode Island equivalent of a 7-Eleven.
Right.
I'm reading the newspaper and I'm shaking and I'm overjoyed that this guy is no longer around. That's relief. Across the street, coming out of a car wash, was one of the men in my town. One of the guys that did know what happened to me, and one of the guys who had been protective to me over the last 18 months. So I pedaled my bike across Smithfield Avenue and drove up to the car wash as this guy was pulling out. Came up to the side of his car, and he could tell something was wrong. He rolled down his window, and I blurted out, "He's dead, he's dead, he's dead." That's all I said. And he looked up to me, and he said 15 words that locked in 35 years of silence. He said to me, "Don't say anything to anybody. There were a lot of people looking for that guy."
Right.
And Teena, at that moment, minutes after I learned of this man's murder, it dawned on me, because I didn't say who was dead. All I said was, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead. And at that moment, that's when I realized either the guy I said it to had something to do with it, did it, or knew who did. So I went into silence.
Because if you were to talk about it, you could have caused harm to them.
Yeah.
And so you and I were talking earlier about how we don't want vigilante justice, and how as parents, grandparents, men in someone's town, women in someone's town, when these things happen, we think, I suppose we could think, that taking the law into our own hands would be helpful to the person, to this case to you. But in reality, this vigilante justice, even though they cared about you, compromised you again. It was like almost a different kind of trauma that you couldn't talk, because now you could bring harm to them.
Exactly.
So it's not only about harm coming to you, but when that's would have been released if he had been in jail, but it's released when he's dead, but yet now it's replaced with, I can't talk about this because I have to protect them.
Exactly. Teena, again, the book is not about me as a victim,
Right.
and it's not about sexual assault. It's a book about relationships between men
Right.
and a boy who had been through some trauma.
Right.
Now, for the first 18 months, between March 1st of 74 and the second week of August of 75, I was silent about what happened to me. I was silent because I was a 14-year-old boy, and I was
Right.
embarrassed, and I was
Right.
ashamed. And you
That's
know what?
right.
I was guilty.
That's right. That's how that's how it works with abuse.
I shouldn't have
we
been
feel-
hitchhiking.
That's right.
I should have fought harder.
Right.
It was my fault what happened to
Yeah.
me. So for 18 months, I kept quiet out of fear, and out of
Yeah.
embarrassment, and out of
Yeah.
shame. When he was murdered, I kept quiet, because of what you said. I didn't want to talk about his murder or my assault, because I was afraid that someday, somebody I knew, I would get the phone call from somebody I knew saying that someone I knew had been arrested for murdering that guy, for what that guy had done to me.
That's right.
So there was this secondary reason to be quiet, and I
Right.
carried it for 35 years.
And so now I happen to know that you speak all over the world on college campuses, for all kinds of organizations. You're very active in talking about this, so that making a difference in the world for some other kid who they have to understand they're not alone. Things can be handled in ways where they can be healthy and have great lives, and we don't have the stigma, and you're out there trying to reduce it even more. How did you get to the point that you were able to go forward with that?
I mentioned earlier about this run home after I smashed the window and before I got to my parents' house. Tina, that 7-8 minutes of that night
Of sheer terror.
have been with me for 35 years.
I'm sure.
And they were recurring what I thought were nightmares. A therapist explained to me it was a memory. It was post-traumatic stress. And it's different than a dream. And what happened was about 2 years ago, I literally jumped out of bed screaming for help. I had this vision again of my run home out of his car before I got to the house. I jumped out of bed screaming for help, ran into the wall in my bedroom, and my wife suggested that maybe it's time to get some. So I did. I saw a therapist and started, for the first time, disclosed to, other than my brother, my father, and the men in my town, I disclosed what happened to me to a therapist. Still didn't tell my friends and family. And with therapy, I was able to get to the point which I think is extremely important. Earlier I said I was guilty. I shouldn't have been hitchhiking. I should have fought harder. It's my fault. I got to the point where what happened to me was not my fault.
That's right.
Somebody else was responsible for what happened to me. So I no longer had to be ashamed about being a victim of sexual assault. But I also got to the point where I came to recognize I wasn't responsible for what other people did to that man either.
That's right.
So I didn't have to be quiet
That's right.
about this murder. Those two things, recognizing that I'm not responsible for what happened to me, and I'm not responsible for what other people might have done to that guy, allowed me to release this guilt and this compression of feeling inside.
Exactly, because now we know that while there is post-traumatic stress, there's also something called post-traumatic growth. And it's a big field of research now. And it is the roadmap for working through all kinds of issues that relate to post-traumatic stress. And one of the things that you've done then is emerged out of that into what we call post-traumatic growth, where you're using what happened in your life to make a difference for other people.
Yeah, here's where it can make a difference for other folks. And it's the reason I am going public with my story. It's the reason I wrote the book. It's to let other victims, whether they're sexual assault victims or victims of violent crime and domestic violence, but if you've been a victim of a violent crime, you need to know you're not alone.
That's right.
And I'm not about to be a hypocrite and tell people you should disclose. It took me 35 years to disclose. But what I am offering is that there's hope. If you can get yourself to the place where you realize you're not responsible for what happened to you, that somebody else is, the perpetrator is, then it'll be a freeing moment. And I can say in my own case, that's when I made the transition from being a sexual assault victim to being a survivor of a stranger abduction sexual assault.
And I have said to you before, and I'll say to you again, and not everyone has to do this. We all get to work through these things in the ways that are right for us. But you've moved then from being a survivor to being a leader in the field to call attention to this issue. And you're involved with many groups around the world here where you tell this story, and you probably open up doors for people that have never had anyone else open those doors up for them.
Tina, I got an email and then a phone call, follow-up phone call, with a woman who is in an American Indian reservation in northern Michigan on the Canadian border. And up until that phone call, I didn't realize how valuable the book could be and how helpful it could be to other people. So this woman who's a tribal leader in an American Indian tribe on the Canadian border called me and said to me that there's an epidemic of sexual assault, male on child sexual assault in Indian reservations. It was unknown to me. She said that she's using my book with kids between the ages of 8 and 14 so that if they read it, they could get the strength to disclose if it's happening to them. And what she liked was the fact that I was a hockey player. There's a number of these kids, they're on the Canadian border in northern Michigan. They're hockey players.
That's great.
So these macho kids have this opinion that it shouldn't happen to me, it's my fault, I'm not going to tell anybody.
That's right.
I know that in one situation, this book's being used to encourage kids to say, you know, it happened to somebody else. It happened to a child who was your age, a long time ago, but he was your age. It happened to a hockey player. If it's happening to you, come tell somebody.
And in Mercer County, if someone is the victim of a sexual assault, a child, or if there's an adult that is suspicious of this or worried about this, what do they do in Mercer County?
There's a fantastic agency. It's called Prevention Education, Inc. That's how most people know it. It's also now, they changed their name a few years ago. It's called PEI Kids. It's in Lawrence Township, and the phone number there is 609-695-3739. Again, 609-695-3739.
And what do they provide?
It's crisis counseling to child victims of sexual assault and their families. So it's a full suite of services. DIFUS, the Division of Youth and Family Services, is tightly coordinated with PEI Kids. So again, if a child needs to disclose or if you need some guidance, PEI runs programs in schools. They run counseling sessions. They run peer-to-peer sessions so children can be with their brothers and sisters. Again, it's an organization that's been in place for 25 years.
That's great.
They do a phenomenal amount of work. They'll see roughly 300 children a year. Just from Mercer County. And these are documented cases of sexual abuse.
And outside of Mercer County, how do people seek support?
There are so many places, Tina. And I think the biggest challenge for me to answer that question is to come up with the two, right? So, again, there are dozens if you look, but I think there are two that do a fantastic job. They all do fantastic work, but there are two. One's called Child Help.
Okay.
It's childhelp.org. And it's so easy to remember their phone number. Because I would ask you, who are we doing this for? And hopefully you'd say, we're doing it for a child.
Oh.
Right? The phone number for Child Help is 1-800-4-A-CHILD.
Oh, that's great.
Right? So if you're suspecting abuse or if you just want some information, again, in Mercer County, call PEI Kids. Outside of Mercer County, pick up the phone and do it for the child.
That's right.
1-800-4-A-CHILD. It's childhelp.org on the web. There's another fantastic organization based in Washington, D.C. It's called RAINN. It's RAINN. Stands for the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. Forgive me, I don't have their phone number.
Okay.
But they're RAINN, RAINN.org on the web. They maintain a 24/7, just like Child Help. Child Help's 24/7, but Child Help is a child abuse hotline. RAINN is a 24/7 anonymous and confidential assault helpline. Okay? Sexual assault helpline. So call them. Go to rain.org, childhelp.org, call them, and they're there to help.
And how wonderful that we have these services now that we didn't have before. People also can speak to their physician if they're willing to do that, or to their mental health providers or whomever, but there is a great deal of support out there.
If you can, pick up the phone and dial 911.
That's right.
If you're at risk,
Right.
if you're immediately at risk, if you've just been harmed, dial 911, right? The key is, if you're tentative about disclosing, if you want help, a lot of people want to make sure that they can do so in a confidential, so no one will talk about it, and in an anonymous, so that you don't have to give up your name. rain.org, and childhelp.org maintain 24/7 anonymous and confidential helplines. And that's what, dial 911 first. And if you want anonymity and confidentiality, Child Help or RAINN.
911 for danger.
Absolutely.
That's what we say to our grandchildren, 911 for danger, right? So these organizations were not available to you, but you had a very astute brother who, well, maybe you didn't have to be that astute to see how upset you were, but very astute brother and father who did the right things by taking you down to the police station. And I'm not sure that that would have happened in every family.
Yeah, Tina, recently I came to understand how important it was, and to give credit to my father for being willing to take me. I can tell you, on the crawl home, and it was a crawl, there were more than once during my attack, I said to myself, if I live through the night, this guy will pay. Although I didn't call him a guy at the time. I said, if I live through the night, this guy will pay.
And I love that health came out in you then, you know that.
When I was literally crawling home, I did say to myself, if they won't take me to the police, I'll crawl the 7 miles by myself.
Is that right?
I knew before I got home that I was going to the police.
Good for you.
But fortunately, and again, I give a lot of credit to my father and my brother, I went in the house, they immediately knew something was wrong.
Right.
They isolated me from the rest of the family, and there was no hesitation in going to the police to report this and for help.
And what's your experience been like now in these last, couple years where you've been on the road sharing your story and changing the world for probably many, many kids that you'll never meet? and adults that you'll never meet. What's it been like for you?
Teena, it's extremely rewarding, and I didn't set out knowing that it would be. I set out to tell this story to the people that were closest to me, my friends, my family, people I love that had no idea that this was... I am who I am, and quite pompously I'll tell you, I'm pretty happy with who I am.
Yeah, I think I would be too.
But I've hidden one of the most important things that happened to me, which made me what I am. I've hidden that from the people who are closest to me.
Your ability to overcome adversity was hidden.
Yeah.
And it is true. This is part of what made you who you are.
Yeah. So I set out
Not that we want to get there this way.
No. I set out to tell those closest to me, those I love, what happened, so that they could fully understand who I am and why. And then it just grew from there. And again, people, Indian reservations in Michigan, I got a phone call from an internet crimes law enforcement officer on the island of Malta who had read the book. I talked to him. I've gotten phone calls from people. I got a phone call from a Wall Street executive I worked with. He's in his 60s, he's retired. He read my book. He called me and told me that I was the first one he told. After reading my book, for more than 45 years, the guy kept it a secret. He was molested on a college campus and never told anybody until after he read my book. 45 years later, he told me. So it's not about me. It's really about me sharing my story and becoming healthier, both physically and emotionally healthier, by coming to the realization. Again, I want to stress I made that transition in my mind from a survivor to a survivor, from being a victim. And I did that by shedding that guilt. And by getting away and recognizing, again, I'm not responsible for what happened to me. I'm not responsible for what happened to other people. And if other victims of sexual assault or violence can get to that point, they themselves will be happier.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing our story, your story with us, because these are the stories that we need to hear. We need to have models to know how, when we have these terrible circumstances, how we recover. And how someone else does it goes a long way in letting us know how we can go about, how we can get support, knowing that it's not our fault, knowing that we can go forward and have a great life. So thank you so much. This is Keith Smith and his book, Men in My Town. And your website is what?
It's meninmytown.wordpress, WORDPRESS.com. So meninmytown.wordpress.com.
I really, really appreciate you being here. Good luck to you, and I'll be watching to see where this goes over the next few years. You take care of yourself, and thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Take care.
Thank you, Teena.
Bye-bye. And thank each of you for being here. Take care of yourselves, too, and we'll see you next time here at Wisdom and Beyond. Bye-bye.